He was one of America's favorite funny men.
If there were a Mount Rushmore of Saturday Night Live, Phil would be on there.
She was a beautiful swimsuit model dreaming of stardom.
Absolutely stunning.
And together, they appeared to be the perfect Hollywood couple.
This is my lovely wife, Brynn.
But one day, the laughter stopped.
There's been a shooting.
I think the question on most people's minds was why?
And now, Snapped goes inside for a first-hand look at the celebrity murder that shocked the nation.
You just thought, wow.
From the relationship's promising start.
When she first told me about Phil, she was excited. She was on a high.
Through its depressing lows.
He was emotionally distant.
She was in pretty much hell.
To the behind-the-scenes drama.
She would come to the set and they would fight.
That turned a comedian's marriage into a tragedy.
Pow, one bullet for the brain.
And left insiders fighting over exactly who to blame.
She was not a heartless killer. She was under the influence.
Los Angeles, California, May 28, 1998. It was around 6 a.m. on a quiet Thursday morning when the 911 call came in from the San Fernando Valley suburb of Encino.
Yeah, hi, there's been a shooting.
It was shocking news. An upscale enclave just over the mountain from Beverly Hills, Encino was a place many of the city's show business elite called home.
How many people were shot? Just one.
And based on the way the caller described the wound, the shooting was likely fatal.
So what part of the body? The head.
It's obvious that he's dead.
So is this an accident or what? Do you know what happened? I have no idea.
All he knew for certain was that the dead man's wife was hysterical and that she just locked herself in the bedroom with her husband's body.
I'm trying to calm her down.
The LAPD rushed to the scene.
You want to get in there as quickly as you can.
And the identity of the victim only added to the urgency.
The victim was Phil Hartman.
Actor, comedian, and former Saturday Night Live cast member.
There was something wrong. This must be a mistake.
But it was no mistake. One of America's favorite comedians was dead, and his wife of 10 years, Brynn Hartman, was barricaded in the bedroom with the body.
It was complete chaos.
Born Vicky Jo Omdahl in 1958, Brynn grew up far from the Hollywood spotlight in Thief River Falls, Minnesota.
She was a small-town girl with big-town dreams.
And by the time she was a teenager, Vicky Jo realized she had what it took to chase her dreams.
She looked in the mirror and went, I could do something with this. She got a lot of attention for her look. She was very pretty.
It's like a Barbie doll. Absolutely stunning.
So in her early 20s, she left her hometown behind and headed for Minneapolis.
She set her sights on a modeling career.
And once in Minneapolis, the pretty blonde was soon booking more than enough commercials and catalog work to pay the bills.
She actually did well as a model in Minnesota.
However, Vicky Jo dreamed of something Minneapolis could never offer: stardom.
She wanted to be on the red carpet.
Flashing lights, the Hollywood lifestyle.
So in the early 80s, the 20-something hit the road.
She's off to Hollywood.
Vicky Jo totally was chasing her personal American dream.
Even if by the time she arrived in California, she was no longer Vicky Jo.
It was during this time that Vicky Jo changed her name to Brynn.
Although once she arrived in California, Brynn was in for a shock. She might have been the prettiest girl in Thief River Falls and one of the most successful models in Minneapolis. But in Hollywood, beautiful blondes were everywhere.
There's lots of young girls who come out to California and want to make a success of themselves.
And in that extremely competitive market, Brynn booked few shoots her first few years in LA.
She hadn't really hit any success.
Not until 1986, when 28-year-old Brynn landed a long-term contract with Catalina Swimwear.
When Brynn got the Catalina job, I think it really excited her and made her think other things were possible, other things will come from it.
It was more than just a steady income, too. Working for a big-name swimwear company was the struggling model's passport into the world of celebrity.
She was at big Hollywood parties in the universe of some really sort of big Hollywood names.
But as it turned out, it was a relatively unknown comic who caught Brynn's eye. 10 years older than Brynn, Phil Hartman hadn't come to California seeking stardom. His family moved there when he was only 10 years old.
He was born in Canada, moved to California, spent a lot of years surfing.
But he also showed early promise as a performer.
He was voted class clown in high school.
And in 1975, he joined an LA sketch comedy troupe, The Groundlings.
When he would get on stage, he would come to life.
He performed. He taught classes. He worked with a lot of other great improvisers.
One of them was a fellow Groundlings member named Paul Reubens, better known as Pee Wee Herman, the iconic character that Phil helped create.
He was a major part of the Pee Wee Herman stage show. He was a co-writer. He was a major character. He put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into the creation of this whole universe that they had around Pee Wee.
And in 1985, what had started as a stage show became a hit movie and a TV series. It was Reubens' big break, but not Phil's.
He didn't really get the credit. Everyone kind of focused on Paul and on Pee Wee.
Even worse, the comedian's second marriage had just ended in divorce.
So he was married twice before Brynn.
So in 1986, hoping to cheer the struggling comedian up, some friends arranged a blind date with an attractive swimsuit model, Brynn Omdahl.
When she first told me about Phil, she was excited. She was on a high.
And Phil was just as excited. In fact, dating the 28-year-old swimsuit model was exactly the confidence builder Phil needed to shake off his depression.
He felt that Brynn helped him kind of have more of a star kind of image.
And at 37, Phil Hartman was finally about to hit the big time. When Paul Reubens guest hosted Saturday Night Live in November of 1985, he brought his friend Phil along as a writer.
The week he spent at SNL writing with Paul Reubens really made an impression.
And in 1986, just a few months after he started dating Brynn, Saturday Night Live offered him one of the most coveted spots in show business.
Joining the cast of SNL, that's like the break of a lifetime.
But would moving to New York mean a break with Brynn?
What he does is ask Brynn to come with him.
It was a big decision for Brynn, who'd only just broken into the LA-based swimsuit modeling industry. But in the end,
She decided that she would leave behind her modeling career and go support Phil.
And in the fall of 1986, less than a year after she'd met Phil, she followed her new boyfriend to New York so he could chase his dream of comic stardom.
He was really the MVP of SNL. He was in virtually every sketch.
He was a writer as well as an actor.
And his versatility soon earned him a nickname among his fellow cast members.
This quality that I have of being what they call the utility man. And it's something the show will always need, someone with range.
They called him the glue because he held the show together and he held sketches together.
He was very much respected.
Brynn and Phil married in 1987, and a year later, 30-year-old Brynn gave birth to a son. 4 years after that, she gave birth to their daughter.
From all accounts, Brynn was a wonderful mom.
She was a very loving person.
And Phil was a doting father.
Phil talked about the children quite often. He loved them deeply. I think he was really looking forward to watching them grow up.
And by the mid-90s, after 8 years with SNL, its grueling schedule had become a grind.
He wanted to move on.
So hoping to spend more time with his kids and raise them in Southern California, he left SNL in 1994 and took a supporting role in a sitcom.
The Hartmans moved back to California because Phil has landed news radio.
He appeared in several movies, did guest spots on other TV shows, and lent his voice to numerous characters on the long-running animated series, The Simpsons.
He played so many different characters on the show.
And by 1998, after 4 years back home in California, it looked as if life after Saturday Night Live had been very good for the Hartmans.
He has all the trappings of, Hollywood success. Power, money.
He was a happily married man with 2 beautiful children. I mean, he had everything, didn't he?
But what the world didn't know was that the comedian's marriage to Brynn was destined for a sudden and tragic end. On May 28, 1998, the Los Angeles police responded to a chilling call from the San Fernando Valley home of Saturday Night Live legend Phil Hartman and his wife, Brynn.
There's been a shooting.
The caller was a show business friend of the Hartmans.
He was a stuntman, a good friend of Brynn's, an ex-boyfriend, in fact. But Phil was totally okay with them hanging out.
And according to Ron, Phil had been shot in the head by Brynn.
The wife shot him? Yeah.
Exactly what had happened, Ron couldn't say, other than Brynn was hysterical, incoherent even.
She was strong.
And according to Ron, she had just locked herself into the bedroom with Phil's body.
All right, where's the weapon now? It's in my hand.
Still, the LAPD was taking no chances.
The shooter was still there, and we still had hot scene.
Within minutes, squad cars and police tape surrounded the Hartmans' upscale Encino home.
We had no idea what we were facing at that particular time. Shots had been fired, and there was a shooter on the premises.
Their immediate concerns were the Hartmans' 9-year-old son and 6-year-old daughter, who were both in the house and wide awake after their mother's screams and the police sirens.
They just stayed in their room, fearful, because they were scared.
Ron rescued Brynn and Phil's 9-year-old son on his way to meet the first officers on the scene.
Ron runs the young boy out to safety.
And the police soon rescued his 6-year-old sister, too.
She was found kind of cowering in a corner of a closet.
What a nightmare for those children.
Then, once the Hartmans' children were safe,
our officers searched each room until we got to the only room was left was the master bedroom.
But rather than break down the door and possibly put Brynn and the officers in danger, the police turned things over to their hostage negotiation team.
They're going to try to lure her out and keep her from hurting herself.
And while the hostage negotiators tried to establish contact with Brynn, the investigators turned to her friend, Ron. Ron told the investigators that it had all started with a phone call from Brynn the night before.
She calls Ron and asks him if she can come over.
According to what Brynn told Ron, Phil had spent the evening out at the rented hangar where he kept his collection of planes and exotic cars.
Phil decides that he'd like to spend the evening playing with his toys.
And Brynn had called Ron.
She didn't feel like being alone.
It really just seemed like she wanted someone to talk to.
Ron told the police that Brynn had come over to his place in Studio City, just a half-hour's drive from Encino.
Brynn arrives at Ron's house in Studio City around 10.
And according to Ron, she had seemed a little down.
She complains a little bit about, her marriage.
Brynn would say that Phil wasn't paying attention.
Phil seems disinterested, and that there's really just no spark.
Ron said he had done his best to cheer Brynn up a little.
They have a few beers.
But after a couple of hours, Ron said that the conversation had taken an unusually serious turn for the normally light-hearted Brynn.
The conversation gets really heavy to the point where Brynn asks Ron if he believes in God.
This was out of character for Brynn.
Still, Ron said that when Brynn left his house after midnight, she had seemed okay.
She has a couple of beers, but in general, he didn't feel that she was overly intoxicated.
But then, at 3:30 a.m., Brynn had suddenly called Ron again. And Ron said that this time she had sounded very different.
Brynn reaches back out to Ron, hysterical and distraught, and asks to come over.
Ron said that he had told Brynn it was too late and that she needed to go back to sleep. But according to Ron, Brynn had ignored his advice.
They hang up the phone, and 20 minutes or so, she shows up at his house.
And as soon as he opened the door, Ron knew that something was wrong.
You can see that she's obviously drunk.
She is falling over and incapable, really, of even holding herself up.
Brynn was mumbling. She wasn't making much sense.
And then, as she came in the door,
she says, "I killed Phil."
Ron said that he didn't believe her since she was obviously drunk.
He was like, oh, she's high as a kite.
But then
she pulls a gun out of her handbag.
At this point, he doesn't know what to think.
So Ron said he'd done the first things he could think of. Take the gun from Brynn and give her some coffee.
For the next 2 hours, Ron just tries to sober her up.
By 6 a.m., Brynn was a bit more sober. So Ron said they'd driven over to the Hartmans. Not that he really expected to find Phil dead.
This is a hard story for anyone to believe, especially if you've known Brynn.
He's still not sure if she's just babbling incoherently or if she's serious.
But then, after Brynn led him past the rooms where her children slept and into the master bedroom,
Ron sees that Phil is lying on his bed.
It's obvious that he's dead.
Ron said that Brynn had started screaming hysterically at the sight of her husband's body, as if she was as surprised by the discovery as he was.
She apparently was so whacked that she wasn't clear in her mind whether she had really killed him or not.
Ron said that once he realized Phil was dead, he'd stepped out of the bedroom to call 911.
Brynn locks the door behind him.
And while Ron was on the phone with the police,
she's also simultaneously on the phone, and she's calling either family or friends, and she's telling them what happened.
Calling people in order to just make it more real. Hello, I just shot Phil. No, still doesn't seem real. Hello, I just shot Phil. Still doesn't seem real. I can just see her trying to make it like, how could that happen?
So that's kind of going on at the same time while Ron is in the hallway calling the police.
But by the time Brynn heard the sound of the approaching sirens, the reality of what she had done finally sunk in. Phil was dead.
At that point, she was on the phone to her sister.
She spoke to her sister and said, "Please take care of the kids."
By then, the police had the Hartmans' Encino home cordoned off, and just in time.
The media started to convene down the block. This was about to become a huge media circus.
This is, a huge story.
However, just before the cameras went live, the hostage negotiators finally managed to get through to Brynn's cell phone.
So they know she's inside.
They want to know what happened. They want to talk to her.
I had to find out what situation was inside.
And hopefully talk her into unlocking the bedroom door.
They are concerned for her safety.
They were concerned for their own safety, too, if it came to breaking down the door.
If an officer tried to go through there, he'd be a big target.
So moving quickly, the supervisor at the scene sent 2 officers around the back of the house to the bedroom window.
What normally happens in a situation like that, where you're trying to create a diversion, is somebody will break a window or to divert the person's attention and then make entry.
It looked as if the time to act was fast approaching, too. The negotiators were making little headway with Brynn.
She told them, "I don't know what to do."
And as the officers made their final preparations to break down the door, it was clear that Brynn was approaching the crisis point.
She's telling them that her life is over.
By 6:30 on the morning of May 28, 1998, a small but growing crowd of curious onlookers and news camera crews gathered outside the Encino home of comedian Phil Hartman.
The yellow tape is up, the crime scene tape, the media is there.
It had been less than half an hour since a friend of Hartman's wife, Brynn, had called 911 with shocking news.
She said she has killed her husband.
It's a really high-profile case. It's a total media circus.
Brynn and Phil's children, ages 6 and 9, had been removed from the house shortly after the police arrived.
I can't imagine the terror they must have felt.
But their mother was still inside.
Brynn has locked herself into the room with her dead husband, and police are trying to negotiate her to come out.
However, even as the standoff continued, the media and the entire country struggled to process the first shocking reports from the scene.
The story broke. You just thought, wow, that just doesn't make sense.
One of America's most beloved comedians was dead, and his swimsuit model wife appeared to be the killer.
The question on most people's minds was why?
Although, as it turned out, those within the couple's inner circle already knew the answer. On the red carpet, it might have appeared that the superstar comedian had it all.
Introduce you to your wife. This is my lovely wife, Brynn.
Phil had his very charming, very outgoing personality when he was in public or performing.
Time of my life. You got to realize that I had struggled in Hollywood for many years. I know a good job when I have one.
But beneath that public persona, the comedian was an intensely private man.
He was very gruff, emotionally distant, emotionally unavailable.
People felt like they didn't really know him, that he was kind of putting up some kind of a wall.
And he walled off everyone, even Brynn.
He wasn't paying attention. He was being aloof.
He would just be emotionally unavailable.
And that was especially hard on Brynn. The former model wasn't accustomed to being ignored.
She was used to a lot of attention.
According to friends, the more Phil withdrew, the more insecure Brynn had become.
It was a dark time for her.
She is feeling unsafe, insecure, and concerned about her marriage.
And to make matters worse, she'd given up so much to marry Phil in the first place. In 1986, when Phil first asked Brynn to come with him to New York, she had been happy to walk away from her career as a swimsuit model. But she had always intended to be more than a wife and mother, because in her mind, marrying Phil wasn't so much the end of her career as the start of a new phase.
She had dreams of making it big in showbiz, too.
And when she went to New York, she wasn't just following Phil. She was still following the same dream that had already taken her a long way from her tiny hometown of Thief River Falls.
She wanted to make a name for herself.
So while Phil joined the cast of Saturday Night Live, Brynn had started going on auditions.
She was trying to get her face on camera.
She also started writing.
She was working with a very well-known writer on a screenplay.
And she figured that being married to one of the stars of Saturday Night Live would give her an advantage over the thousands of other hopefuls trying to score a screen credit.
He was her way to get in.
She was trying to get Phil to help her.
But he had his own booming career to consider.
I think that Phil would have liked to have helped Brynn, but he was so busy with guest shots, movies, SNL, voiceovers.
To the point that he could barely keep up with all the offers.
People really paid attention to him.
But no one was paying attention to Brynn. From the paparazzi on the red carpet.
What's your best or worst? What's your best or worst?
To producers and casting directors.
And she was getting no success.
It doesn't seem that she was in any kind of demand by anybody as a writer or an actress or anything.
And the higher Phil climbed, the more jealous Brynn became.
The resentment, really kicked in.
Resentment that she readily shared with friends.
That Phil won't help her, that she is now stuck being a housewife, and she doesn't want to be a housewife. He couldn't turn her into a star, and that's what she wanted.
In fact, she did little to hide her resentment in public either.
Where Phil, is being interviewed and she's off to the side, the look on her face told me, she hated being off to the side.
And she made it known, even on set.
She would come to the set and they would fight.
Things got so bad that some friends even wondered if Brynn was actually trying to sabotage Phil's career.
Brynn affected his performances in that she could mess with his head before he went on, if she timed it right. She knew where to hurt him. She knew where to hit him.
And by the time Phil left SNL in 1994, the entire cast and crew knew that his marriage was in serious trouble.
The facade of Phil and Brynn as a happy golden couple was starting to crumble.
And even when the couple returned to California, Brynn and Phil's relationship continued to fall apart, especially as the former model's 40th birthday approached.
For Brynn, this is a very difficult time.
Youth was so important to her and seemed so important in terms of her appeal.
Brynn did her best to stop the clock.
Her whole thing was, what surgery can I have? What can I have lifted, burned off? You know, how can I stay young?
But surgery could only do so much.
She was losing the battle, and I know that affected her.
Brynn fell into this depression.
And that led to something worse. When Brynn first hit Hollywood in the early 80s, drugs were everywhere.
Quaaludes and cocaine, it just became so accessible.
And like almost everyone else at the party, she had a hard time saying no.
It's a little bit of a cliche in Hollywood. A young girl comes into town with dreams and winds up getting caught in drugs and alcohol.
That phase of her life had appeared to be over by the time she met Phil.
Brynn and I, we got sober in the 80s.
But as her marriage and career had started to crumble,
she coped in the way that she used to when she was younger, drugs and alcohol.
And that only made her jealousy, resentment, and anger far worse.
The ugly part. It came out when she drank. It came out when she did cocaine.
This is very disturbing for Phil. He knows that this isn't good for Brynn. It's not good for the family.
He was dealing with someone who was out of control. Sober 1 minute, not the next.
And once the family returned to California, Brynn spent the next 4 years in and out of rehab and seeing psychiatrists for depression.
By that time, she was in pretty much hell. The addiction was full-blown. Anyone who really knew her knew what she was struggling with. The demons were deep.
But then, in April of 1998, her doctors had put her on a new medication to combat her depression.
She was prescribed Zoloft to help boost her mood and possibly just help her feel better.
It was her last chance. That spring, Phil was running out of patience.
It's like trying to help a drowning person. It's ugly. They struggle. They push you down.
I don't think he wanted to break up the family unit.
But he would if he had to. In fact, at the beginning of May, he'd given Brynn an ultimatum.
He was going to leave with the kids if she didn't get sober.
He wanted his children to grow up as normal as one can in a show business environment. And having mom continually in a rehab center or what have you would certainly have negated that.
But now, just a few weeks after he delivered that ultimatum, Phil's hope of a normal childhood for his children had been shattered. After a night of drinking, Brynn had apparently done the unthinkable.
The demons took over, and boom.
But would the killing stop there? Locked in the bedroom with Phil's body, she had just spent several tense minutes on the phone with the police.
They're going to try to lure her out and keep her from hurting herself.
But Brynn was through talking. At a little after 6 a.m. on the morning of May 28, 1998, a friend of Brynn Hartman's called 911 with shocking news.
She said she had killed her husband.
Brynn's husband, Saturday Night Live legend Phil Hartman, was dead.
It was obviously a very high-profile case.
The LAPD rushed to the Hartmans' Encino home, but by the time they arrived, Brynn had barricaded herself into the master bedroom with Phil's body.
This is kind of the beginning of the end.
The police spent several tense minutes on the phone with Brynn, trying to talk her down. But before they could convince her to open the door,
She hung up on them.
And seconds later, even as they prepared to storm into the bedroom,
They heard another shot fired.
fearing the worst, officers rushed into the master bedroom.
They forced their way inside, realizing that they needed to go in now.
Inside, they found the comedian sprawled on the bed.
Mr. Hartman had been shot just above the eyebrow, through the head.
Brynn lay beside him, a gun still in her hand.
Both were dead.
The entire tragedy was over in time to make the morning news.
Now to the shooting death of comedian Phil Hartman. More details are emerging about what happened.
I could not have been more shocked. Of all the people at Saturday Night Live that you would expect to meet an untimely end, Phil Hartman was the last person you would have expected.
But while the tragedy had been a shock to the comedian's fans, close friends, family, and former SNL co-workers all knew that the relationship had been on the brink of disaster.
I was not surprised that she had killed him, given what I had seen, given the little bits and pieces he had told me.
There was a lot of very disturbing stuff that was going on behind the scenes in Phil's life.
Marital trouble, depression, addiction.
She had been dealing with alcohol issues and cocaine addiction for a long time.
And on the night of May 27th, 1998, Brynn had apparently reached her breaking point.
Friends said that Phil had even threatened to leave with the kids if Brynn didn't get sober.
He didn't know how to handle her. Things were spinning out of control.
Precisely what led to the shooting, the police weren't sure. All they knew for certain was that Brynn was feeling depressed when she left her friend's house after midnight, and that 3 hours later, she showed up on his doorstep again, drunk, and announced that she had just shot Phil.
There's this window between 1 and probably 3:30, where we don't know what happened.
We can only speculate that there might have been an argument between Brynn and Phil.
And whether they had argued earlier or not, at some point, Brynn had apparently crept up on her sleeping husband with a gun.
Using Phil's own .38, Brynn shot him 3 times. She shot him in the chest, in the neck, and point blank in the face.
That much the police could say for certain, based on forensics and Brynn's own statements.
She called 3 or 4 different people, confessed to them what had happened, so that's kind of the way it was pieced together.
Brynn hadn't told anyone just what had caused her to snap, but her actions led police to conclude that the crime wasn't premeditated.
This feels to me like a situation where there was irrational judgment driven by rage and anger and frustration.
And there was definite evidence that Brynn hadn't been thinking clearly that evening.
The toxicology report showed that she was under the influence of drugs when it happened.
In her system is cocaine, alcohol, marijuana, and she's still on her antidepressants.
But when her drug-fueled rage had passed,
she knew deep down when she came out of her haze what she had done. It was horrible.
And then
she tried to solve it with another tragedy.
She sat down next to him and pow, 1 bullet to the brain.
Using a second gun kept in the bedroom.
They had multiple guns in their home. Phil had a .38, Brynn had a .38 of her own. Brynn had used her own .38 to kill herself.
She obviously could not live with guilt. She couldn't live with this, knowing what she had done.
That was basically the official conclusion.
It was a murder-suicide.
And once the LAPD declared the case closed, Phil's family and most of the couple's friends did their best to try and move past the tragedy.
The Hartman family sadly accepted the police's findings.
The media did far more than that, though, using the official findings as a springboard for any number of sensational stories about Brynn's drug and alcohol abuse and how it had claimed the life of the beloved comedian.
She became the villain.
The media reports seem to paint her as this terrible monster.
But there was one group of people who strongly disagreed: Brynn's family.
The family really struggled with being able to believe that Brynn would be able to do this.
Brynn was not a monster. She was a smart, loving woman.
Convinced that Brynn wasn't responsible for her husband's murder, in May of 1999, the Omdahl family filed a wrongful death civil suit against what they believed was to blame, Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. In their lawsuit, Brynn's family claimed that the company's marketing had intentionally downplayed the dangerous side effects of their antidepressant drug, Zoloft.
The Omdahl family was citing the recent findings that said that Zoloft could have side effects, including violent behavior.
In some cases, it could allegedly be attributed to high levels of depression, suicidal thoughts.
And the lawsuit claimed it was no coincidence that Brynn had only started taking the drug 1 month before the shooting.
Brynn was seeking professional help, and she was prescribed Zoloft.
It might have just been some kind of horrible chemical, interaction that caused this.
And the timing of her prescription wasn't the only evidence the lawsuit cited. There was also Brynn's autopsy.
Brynn's system contained large amounts of Zoloft.
And as far as Brynn's family was concerned, that meant she was innocent of Phil's murder.
Brynn's family and supporters disputed that she was capable of killing her husband.
I don't think she was in her right mind at all when she pulled the trigger.
But would a jury agree? Or would jurors see the lawsuit as a desperate act by a family in denial?
The pain of having a family member perpetrate a violent and destructive act is so difficult to accept and understand.
Tragedies like this happen, people look for something to blame.
For its part, Pfizer denied any responsibility for Brynn's actions.
Pfizer countered with the toxicology reports that stated that Brynn was not only under the influence of Zoloft, but also cocaine and alcohol.
We're not supposed to drink and do drugs while we're on medication. And part of that is because it changes everything within the medication.
And there was also plenty of other evidence suggesting that Brynn and Phil's relationship could have come to its deadly conclusion without Zoloft playing a role.
There were plenty of witnesses able to talk about the tumultuous relationship between Brynn and Phil.
There was a lot of drama. It seemed to just be getting worse.
Marital drama, drug abuse, and Brynn's fragile mental state. Added all up, it was a recipe for disaster.
All of that combination led to, I think, poor judgment, poor impulse control, and a tragedy.
In May of 1999, the family of Brynn Hartman had filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. 1 year earlier, the former swimsuit model had shot and killed her husband, famed comedian and former Saturday Night Live cast member Phil Hartman. And then she had taken her own life.
This plays out like a Greek tragedy.
According to the family's lawsuit, the tragedy was due to Zoloft, the Pfizer-made antidepressant that Brynn had begun taking just a month prior to the shootings.
The family claimed that Pfizer had really been downplaying the side effects of Zoloft.
Side effects such as violent outbursts and suicidal thoughts.
For Brynn's family, this was proof that she was not a heartless killer. She was under the influence of prescription drugs.
There were certain chemicals in her mind that made her believe the only solution was to take a gun and put it to her husband's head and kill him.
Although according to the pharmaceutical company, those chemicals weren't their responsibility.
You can also blame cocaine and alcohol that were allegedly in her system.
So just who or what was to blame?
We may never know.
In the end, Pfizer settled out of court with her family.
Rather than go to court, Pfizer paid the Omdahl family an undisclosed amount to close the lawsuit.
I don't think it necessarily means that they were guilty in any way. I think it was just their way of doing damage control.
They were very concerned about negative publicity.
Whatever damage the publicity might have done to Pfizer's reputation, An untimely death has done little to dim Phil Hartman's.
Even though he's gone, it's obvious that his life's legacy will live on.
He's really looked at as one of the greats. You know, if there were a Mount Rushmore of Saturday Night Live, Phil would be on there.
Although, like other SNL cast members lost before their time, fond memories of the laughs Phil gave will be tinged with regret for the jokes, the skits, and the characters he never got to create.
If Phil had not been killed, I think his career would have just climbed by leaps and bounds.
In some ways, even death couldn't stop him.
He got an Emmy nomination for News Radio the year after he died.
Phil Hartman was given a star on the Walk of Fame.
Other than his impressive body of work, it's Hartman's only monument. Cremated after his death, his ashes were scattered across Catalina Island.
He was a beach guy. He was kind of a surfer dude, so I think it was a fitting tribute.
And Brynn's ashes were scattered alongside his.
He did stay with her through all the ups and downs. For better or worse, they were intertwined in life, and they remained intertwined in death.
See that? That was amazing. I love this.
The stage lights often cast the most deceptive of glows, illuminating public personas while shrouding the intricate, often troubling, realities that simmer beneath. For years, America knew Phil Hartman as one of its most beloved funny men, a comedic titan whose sheer versatility could transform him from a bumbling lawyer to a smooth-talking president with effortless grace. He was, in the grand tapestry of American humor, an undeniable giant, a true master of his craft. Indeed, if one were to carve out a Mount Rushmore dedicated to the legends of Saturday Night Live, Phil Hartman's likeness would undeniably be etched into that granite, a testament to his indelible legacy. His performances were not merely acts. They were embodiments, each character a vibrant, unforgettable brushstroke on the canvas of popular culture, earning him not just laughs, but profound admiration and respect from colleagues and audiences alike. He possessed a rare gift, an almost chameleon-like ability to inhabit any role, making it uniquely his own, leaving audiences captivated and yearning for more. Alongside this comedic luminary, often seen on the glittering red carpets of Hollywood, was Brynn Hartman, a woman whose striking beauty had once graced the pages of swimsuit magazines. She was a vision, absolutely stunning, a radiant presence who, like so many others drawn to the magnetic pull of Los Angeles, harbored dreams of stardom, of seeing her own name in lights, of finding her own place within the glamorous, often ruthless, firmament of the entertainment industry. Her journey from a small-town girl with big-town aspirations to a Hollywood hopeful was a narrative, familiar to countless others. Yet in her, it took on a particular, almost poignant, significance. She carried with her an ambition that, while perhaps not as outwardly expressed as Phil's comedic genius, burned with an equally fierce intensity. Together, they presented an image of idyllic perfection, the quintessential Hollywood couple, their smiles bright, their public interactions seemingly infused with an unshakable bond. "This is my lovely wife, Brynn," Phil would often say, his voice imbued with gentle pride, a sentiment that resonated with perception of their shared happiness. The world saw a dynamic duo, the comedic genius and the beautiful model, a pairing that seemed destined for enduring success and happiness under the relentless glare of the spotlight. Their union, from an outsider's perspective, appeared to be a fairy tale, a testament to the idea that love could indeed flourish amidst the demanding and often artificial landscape of celebrity. They were, in essence, Hollywood royalty, their public narrative a vibrant, compelling story of shared dreams and collective achievement. But as is so often the case in tales that unfold behind the gilded gates of celebrity, the public narrative was but one facet of a far more complex and ultimately far more tragic truth. One day, with a suddenness that stunned a nation, the laughter stopped. It ceased not gradually, not with a gentle fade, but with the brutal, jarring force of an unexpected thunderclap, leaving an echo of disbelief and profound sorrow in its wake. The silence that followed was deafening, a stark contrast to the boisterous joy Phil Hartman had so effortlessly brought into the lives of millions. I think the question on most people's minds was, why? This collective query hung heavy in the air, a bewildered lament uttered by those who had adored Phil and admired the apparent solidity of his marriage. The public, accustomed to the curated images of celebrity life, found itself utterly unprepared for the raw, unvarnished horror that was about to be revealed. And now, as a dedicated criminal psychology analyst and a narrative artist, I find it imperative to delve deeply, to go inside, as it were, for a first-hand look at the celebrity murder that shocked the nation, to peel back the layers of public perception and reveal the intricate psychological currents that converged into this devastating tragedy. It is a journey not for the faint of heart, but one absolutely essential for understanding the fragility of the human psyche and the devastating consequences when dreams collide with demons. The narrative of Phil and Brynn Hartman, a story seemingly woven with threads of aspiration and affection, began, as many do, with a promising start. When Brynn first spoke of Phil, her words were reportedly tinged with an undeniable excitement, a joyous effervescence that suggested she was on a high. There was a palpable thrill, a sense of new beginnings and shared potential that infused their early days. It was a courtship that, from the outside, appeared to be everything one could hope for in the nascent stages of a deeply felt connection. Yet, as with many complex human relationships, the initial euphoria eventually gave way to a more sobering, even depressing reality. The glittering veneer began to crack, revealing deeper, more troubling fissures. Phil, beneath his genial public facade, was observed to be emotionally distant, a man who, in the intimate confines of his private life, could withdraw into himself, leaving Brynn feeling isolated and unheard. This emotional chasm, this growing void, began to transform her initial high into something far more profound and painful. She, by many accounts, found herself adrift in a sea of emotional neglect, a place where she was in pretty much hell. The vibrant promise of their beginning had soured into a landscape of quiet despair, a testament to the insidious way emotional disconnection can erode the very foundations of love and trust. And as the emotional chasm widened, the story took on a darker, more dramatic hue. The simmering tensions, once perhaps confined to hushed whispers, began to spill over into the public arena, manifesting as behind-the-scenes drama that became increasingly difficult to ignore. Brynn, her frustration and resentment growing, would reportedly come to the set, and they would fight. These weren't mere disagreements. They were bitter confrontations, raw displays of a relationship unraveling under the crushing weight of unmet expectations and festering insecurities. What had once been a comedian's marriage, a union celebrated in the public eye, transformed into a tragedy, a stark and brutal illustration of how the pressures of fame, coupled with deeply personal struggles, can lead to an unimaginable conclusion. The escalating conflict was not merely a symptom, it was a progression, a dark march toward an inevitable and devastating end. Then, with horrifying finality, the ultimate act of violence. Pow, one bullet, through the brain. These chilling words encapsulate the brutal reality of the crime, the sudden, irrevocable cessation of life, a deed that left an entire nation reeling. The swiftness and ferocity of the act stood in stark, devastating contrast to the comedic joy that had defined Phil Hartman's public existence. In the immediate aftermath, as the dust settled on the shattered remnants of a life and a relationship insiders, those who had witnessed the slow, agonizing decay, found themselves fighting over exactly who to blame. The complexity of the human condition, the intertwining threads of addiction, mental health, ambition, and emotional neglect made it impossible for simple answers to suffice. The lines of culpability blurred, the narratives diverging into passionate defenses and accusations. She was not a heartless killer. She was under the influence, was one plea, echoing the desperation to understand, to contextualize, to perhaps even absolve. This sentiment highlighted the profound human struggle to reconcile a horrific act with the perception of a person, demonstrating the deep-seated need for explanations, especially when confronted with such incomprehensible violence. The events of May 28, 1998, unfurled in Los Angeles, California, a city synonymous with dreams, aspirations, and at times, stark realities. It was around 6 a.m. on a quiet Thursday morning when the 911 call pierced the pre-dawn. Stillness of Encino, a San Fernando Valley suburb. The news that followed was nothing short of shocking, resonating with a chilling finality that would reverberate across the country. Encino itself was an upscale enclave, a serene expanse nestled just over the mountain from the opulent grandeur of Beverly Hills. It was a place where many of the city's show business elites sought respite from the ceaseless demands of their careers, a sanctuary of quiet luxury. But on this particular morning, the tranquility of Encino was shattered by an act of violence that defied comprehension. The caller, their voice laced with urgency and distress, described the wound with a harrowing clarity, suggesting that the shooting was likely fatal. The grim assessment was punctuated by a stark declaration. It's obvious that he's dead. This immediate confirmation of death underscored the gravity of the situation, signaling not merely a domestic incident, but a profound tragedy. All the caller knew for certain, beyond the horrifying fact of death, was that the dead man's wife was hysterical, her emotional state a chaotic storm of grief, and perhaps something more profound, and, chillingly, that she just locked herself in the bedroom with her husband's body. This detail painted a picture of raw, uncontained anguish, but also hinted at a deeply disturbing psychological state. A woman barricaded with the very consequence of her actions, or perhaps simply with her deepest sorrow. The Los Angeles Police Department, recognizing the extreme gravity of the situation, immediately rushed to the scene. The identity of the victim, once confirmed, only intensified the urgency and the sense of profound disbelief that began to ripple through the early morning hours. The victim was still Hartman, the name carrying an instant weight of recognition and shock. This was no ordinary tragedy. It was an assault on the collective consciousness, a jarring dissonance between the public image of a beloved figure and the horrific reality unfolding behind closed doors. Actor, comedian, and former Saturday Night Live cast member. The descriptors piled one upon another, each adding to the incredulity. There was something wrong. This must be a mistake. Such were the initial, almost instinctual reactions, a desperate refusal to accept the unthinkable. But it was no mistake. The truth, in its brutal simplicity, was undeniable. One of America's favorite comedians, a man who had brought so much joy and laughter into countless homes, was dead, and his wife of 10 years, Brynn Hartman, was indeed barricaded in the bedroom with the body. The scene, as law enforcement officers were soon to discover, was one of complete chaos, a maelstrom of shock, grief, and an underlying psychological drama that would forever scar the lives of all involved. The events of that morning would serve as a chilling reminder that even the brightest stars could be consumed by the darkest of shadows. To truly understand the psychological currents that led to that devastating morning, one must journey back, far beyond the glittering facade of Hollywood, to the genesis of Brynn Hartman's life. Born Vicky Jo Amdahl in 1958, Brynn's formative years unfolded far from the relentless glare of the Hollywood spotlight. Amidst the unassuming serenity of Thief River Falls, Minnesota, She was, in essence, a small-town girl with big-town dreams. A narrative arc as classic as is compelling in the annals of American ambition. The quietude of her hometown, while offering a sense of stability, could not contain the burgeoning aspirations that began to stir within her. By the time she reached her teenage years, Vicky Jo possessed a burgeoning self-awareness, a nascent understanding that she possessed the qualities necessary to chase her dreams. Whatever they might be, she looked in the mirror and went, "I could do something with this." This introspective moment, a simple act of self-reflection, was a pivotal turning point, signifying a recognition of her physical attributes, particularly her striking beauty. She got a lot of attention for her look, a fact that would profoundly shape her trajectory. Described as very pretty, with a doll-like perfection likened to a Barbie doll, her appearance was indeed absolutely stunning. This external validation, this constant affirmation of her aesthetic appeal, became a powerful fuel for her ambitions, reinforcing the belief that her beauty was not just an attribute, but a currency in the pursuit of a larger, more glamorous life. So, in her early 20s, propelled by this potent combination of self-belief and external validation, she made the decisive choice to leave her hometown behind. Her compass was set for Minneapolis, a larger urban center that promised greater opportunities for her nascent aspirations. She had, with an unwavering focus, set her sights on a modeling career. Once entrenched in Minneapolis, her striking features and undeniable charm quickly paid dividends. The pretty blonde was soon booking more than enough commercials and catalog work to pay the bills. She actually did well as a model in Minnesota, a success that, while providing financial stability, also served to validate her initial assessment of her own potential. It was a confirmation that her beauty held tangible value, a reinforcement of her chosen path. However, the success in Minneapolis, while commendable, was merely a stepping stone, a prelude to a far grander vision. Vicky Jo harbored desires that the Minnesota modeling scene, however lucrative, could never truly fulfill. She yearned for stardom, a profound and all-encompassing ambition that transcended mere financial comfort or regional recognition. She wanted to be on the red carpet, flashing lights, the Hollywood lifestyle. This was the ultimate prize, the glittering zenith of her dreams, a world away from the quiet modesty of Thief River Falls. It was a yearning for a particular kind of recognition, one that came with the universal acclaim and public adoration associated with Hollywood. And so, in the early 1980s, with the audacious spirit of youth and unyielding ambition, the 20-something packed her bags and hit the road. She's off to Hollywood, a declaration that carried with it the weight of immense hope and boundless possibility. Vicky Jo, by this point, was utterly consumed by the pursuit of her personal American dream, a vision of fame and glamour that had become inextricably linked to her identity. It was a dream she pursued with a singular focus, even if, by the time she finally arrived in the sprawling, sun-drenched landscape of California, she was no longer merely Vicky Jo. It was during this transformative period, a time of reinvention and redefinition, that Vicky Jo made a conscious decision to change her name to Brynn. This act of renaming, often a subtle yet profound psychological maneuver, signaled the shedding of her past identity and an embrace of a new persona, one she felt was more suited to the aspirational world she was determined to conquer. However, once she stepped foot in California, Brynn was in for a sobering, even brutal, shock. The competitive landscape of Hollywood was unlike anything she had ever encountered. She might have been, with undeniable certainty, the prettiest girl in Thief River Falls and one of the most successful models in Minneapolis. But in the cutthroat, hypersaturated environment of Hollywood, beautiful blondes were everywhere. This sudden realization was a profound blow to her carefully constructed self-image, a jarring confrontation with the anonymity that awaited even the most striking individuals in the City of Angels. There's lots of young girls who come out to California and want to make a success of themselves. a truth that underscored the enormity of her challenge. In that extremely competitive market, Brynn found herself struggling, booking few shoots her first few years in L.A. The harsh reality was that she hadn't really hit any success, a bitter pill to swallow for someone who had always been accustomed to the easy triumph of her beauty. Her fortunes, however, began to shift in 1986, a year that would prove pivotal in her journey. At 28 years old, Brynn landed a long-term contract with Catalina Swimwear, a significant breakthrough that offered more than just a steady income. When Brynn got the Catalina job, I think it really excited her and made her think other things were possible. Other things will come from it. This contract was a lifeline, a validation of her persistence, and a renewed surge of hope that her dreams were still within reach. It was, crucially, more than just a steady income. It was a passport, a golden ticket into the very world she yearned to inhabit. Working for a big-name swimwear company catapulted the struggling model into the world of celebrities, a realm previously observed from a distance. She was at big Hollywood parties in the universe of some really sort of big Hollywood names. This access, this proximity to the very fabric of stardom, was invaluable for a woman so intent on making her mark. It was at one of these gatherings, amidst the glittering array of prominent figures, that fate, in its intricate design, intervened. As it turned out, it was not a towering Hollywood icon, but a relatively unknown comic who ultimately caught Brynn's eye. His name was Phil Hartman, and his path to California had been markedly different from hers. 10 years Brynn's senior. Phil hadn't arrived in the Golden State seeking instant stardom or to chase a burgeoning modeling career. His family had relocated there when he was only 10 years old, making him, in essence, a transplant, but one who quickly adapted to the laid-back Southern California lifestyle. He was born in Canada, moved to California, spent a lot of years surfing, a testament to his early embrace of the coastal culture. Yet, beneath the relaxed surfer demeanor, Phil harbored an undeniable, burgeoning talent for performance, a spark that had been evident from a young age. He also showed early promise as a performer. He was voted class clown in high school, a seemingly innocuous detail that, in retrospect, speaks volumes about his innate comedic timing and ability to captivate an audience. His journey into the world of professional comedy began in earnest in 1975, when he joined an L.A. sketch comedy troupe, the Groundlings. This was a crucible, a breeding ground for comedic talent, and it was there that Phil truly came alive. When he would get on stage, he would come to life. He performed. He taught classes. His dedication was not merely confined to performing. He was also a mentor, a collaborator, someone deeply invested in the craft. He worked with a lot of other great improvisers, forging connections and honing his skills in an environment rich with creative energy. Among his fellow Groundlings members was a name that would soon become synonymous with whimsical, childlike humor, Paul Reubens. Reubens, better known as Pee Wee Herman, was crafting the iconic character that, with Phil's significant contributions, would soon enchant audiences across the globe. He was a major part of the Pee Wee Herman stage show. He was a co-writer. He was a major character. Phil poured a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into the creation of this whole universe that they had around Pee Wee. His dedication foundational to its eventual success. By 1985, what had initially started as a quirky stage show blossomed into a bona fide phenomenon, expanding into a hit movie and a popular television series. It was, without question, Reubens' big break, propelling him into stratosphere celebrity. However, for Phil, despite his immense contributions, the widespread recognition remained elusive. He didn't really get the credit. Everyone kind of focused on Paul and on Pee Wee. This experience, a common pitfall in the collaborative world of entertainment, highlighted a recurring theme in Phil's early career. His talent was undeniable, his contributions invaluable, but the spotlight often eluded him directly. Even worse, during this period, the comedian's personal life had also taken a hit. His second marriage had just ended in divorce. So he was married twice before Brynn, a detail that, in a psychological analysis, might hint at a pattern of searching for stability, or perhaps a difficulty in maintaining long-term, romantic partnerships amidst the demands of his burgeoning career and his emotionally distant nature. It was against this backdrop of professional near misses and personal setbacks that fate intervened. Once more, in 1986, with the noble intention of cheering the struggling comedian up, some thoughtful friends arranged a blind date. His intended companion, an attractive swimsuit model, Brynn Hartman. The stage was set for a meeting that would forever alter the course of both their lives. A confluence of ambition, vulnerability, and a shared yearning for connection. When Brynn first confided in a friend about Phil, her words were reportedly infused with an almost giddy excitement, painting a picture of newfound elation. She was excited. She was on a high. This initial reaction suggests a profound emotional resonance, a sense of discovery that perhaps transcended the superficial glamour of their Hollywood milieu. Phil, for his part, seemed equally captivated. The arrival of the 28-year-old swimsuit model into his life was reportedly exactly the confidence builder Phil needed to shake off his depression. At 37, having navigated the choppy waters of 2 previous marriages and the often unseen struggles of creative collaboration, he was at a vulnerable juncture. Brynn, with her undeniable beauty and vivacious spirit, offered a fresh perspective, a rejuvenating energy that helped him envision a brighter future. He felt that Brynn helped him kind of have more of a star kind of image, a fascinating psychological insight into how he perceived their coupling. It suggests that Brynn's external validation and public appeal filled a void, offering him a sense of enhanced status and desirability within the social currency of Hollywood. This mutual enchantment, however, contained the subtle seeds of future discord, as both appear to be seeking something beyond simple companionship. As their relationship blossomed, Phil Hartman's professional trajectory was about to ascend to stratospheric heights. The recognition that had eluded him during his Pee Wee Herman days was finally on the horizon. In November of 1985, when Paul Reubens guest-hosted Saturday Night Live, he extended an invitation to his friend Phil, not as a performer, but as a writer. The week he spent at SNL writing with Paul Reubens really made an impression. This brief immersion into the iconic sketch comedy show's creative crucible was a pivotal moment, a demonstration of his undeniable talent in a new, high-stakes environment. Then, in 1986, just a few months after he began dating Brynn, the call came that would change everything. Saturday Night Live, the venerable institution of American comedy, offered him one of the most coveted spots in show business, an invitation to join its illustrious cast. Joining the cast of SNL, that's like the break of a lifetime, a statement that barely captures the enormity of the opportunity. It was the ultimate validation of his comedic genius, a doorway to widespread recognition and influence. But this monumental career shift presented a critical question for their nascent relationship. Would moving to New York mean a break with Brynn? The geographical distance, coupled with the relentless demands of SNL, could easily strain their connection to its breaking point. However, Phil, in a gesture that solidified their bond, asked Brynn to come with him. This was a significant decision for Brynn, who had only just begun to establish herself in the highly competitive, Los Angeles-based swimsuit modeling industry. Her hard-won contract with Catalina Swimwear represented stability and a foothold in the world she craved. Yet, faced with a choice, she made a profound sacrifice. She decided that she would leave behind her modeling career and go support Phil. This decision, while outwardly appearing as a loving act of support, also carried the implicit weight of her own deferred dreams and aspirations. Her belief that her path to stardom might somehow run parallel to, or even be facilitated by, Phil's burgeoning success. And so, in the fall of 1986, less than a year after their initial meeting, Brynn followed her new boyfriend to New York, dedicating herself to supporting his pursuit of comic stardom. Phil, once he joined the cast, quickly proved his mettle, transforming into an indispensable force within the show's dynamic ensemble. He was really the MVP of SNL. He was in virtually every sketch. His tireless work ethic and remarkable range extended beyond mere performance. He was a writer as well as an actor, demonstrating a comprehensive understanding of the comedic craft. His extraordinary versatility, his ability to seamlessly transition between an astonishing array of characters, quickly earned him a nickname among his fellow cast members. This quality that I have of being what they call the utility man, it was a descriptor that captured his multifaceted talent, his capacity to serve the show in virtually any capacity. And it's something the show will always need, someone with range. They affectionately and accurately called him the glue because he held the show together and he held sketches together. He was very much respected. Phil Hartman had truly arrived, not just as a cast member, but as a cornerstone of one of television's most iconic programs. Amidst Phil's meteoric rise to comedic prominence, their personal lives continued to intertwine. Brynn and Phil married in 1987, a year after her pivotal decision to follow him to New York, solidifying their commitment to one another. A year later, in 1988, at the age of 30, Brynn gave birth to their son, marking the joyful expansion of their family. For years after that, their daughter was born, completing the picture of a burgeoning, happy household. From all outward appearances, and indeed from many personal accounts, Brynn was a wonderful mom. She was a very loving person, a sentiment that speaks to her dedication and affection for her children. Phil, too, embraced fatherhood with a heartwarming devotion. Phil talked about the children quite often. He loved them deeply. His words and actions conveyed a profound connection to his offspring. I think he was really looking forward to watching them grow up, a poignant reflection that would later take on an unbearable weight of sorrow. By the mid-1990s, after 8 demanding years with Saturday Night Live, the show's grueling schedule had become a grind for Phil. The relentless pace, the constant pressure of live television, and the inherent sacrifices of such a demanding career began to exact a toll. He wanted to move on, a desire not born of discontent with his success, but rather a yearning for a more balanced life. His primary motivation, a deeply human and understandable one, was to spend more time with his kids and raise them in Southern California. The allure of a more stable, less frenetic environment for his children was a powerful pull. And so, in 1994, he made the significant decision to leave SNL, embarking on a new professional chapter that would ideally align with his familial aspirations. He took a supporting role in a sitcom, a shift that would allow him to remain creatively engaged while offering a greater degree of predictability and presence in his children's lives. The Hartmans moved back to California because Phil has landed news radio. This return to the West Coast symbolized not just a career change, but a deliberate attempt to recalibrate their family life, to put down roots in a place they consider home. Phil's career continued to flourish, demonstrating his enduring appeal and remarkable range even beyond the iconic sketches of SNL. He appeared in several movies, showcasing his dramatic and comedic talents on the big screen. He made guest spots on other TV shows. His familiar face and distinctive voice always a welcome presence. And, perhaps most famously, he lent his voice to numerous characters on the long-running animated series The Simpsons. He played so many different characters on the show, each performance imbued with his characteristic wit and charm, further cementing his status as a beloved figure in popular culture. By 1998, after 4 years back home in California, it truly looked as if life after Saturday Night Live had been very good for the Hartmans. From an external perspective, Phil had achieved a pinnacle of success that few could ever dream of. He has all the trappings of, Hollywood success, power, money. Beyond the material wealth and professional acclaim, he appeared to have achieved the ultimate aspiration. He was a happily married man with 2 beautiful children. The prevailing sentiment, one echoed by many who observed his life, was encapsulated in the question. He had everything, didn't he? The public image was one of complete fulfillment. A man who had successfully navigated the treacherous waters of celebrity to emerge with both professional triumph and personal bliss. But what the world, with its limited vantage point, didn't know, couldn't possibly fathom, was the insidious undercurrent of turmoil that coursed beneath this polished facade. The truth, in its agonizing complexity, was that the comedian's marriage to Brynn was destined for a sudden and tragic end. The picture of perfect happiness was merely a carefully constructed illusion, one that was about to shatter into a million irreparable pieces, revealing profound, unsettling reality that lay beneath. On May 28, 1998, the fragile illusion of the Hartman family's serenity was brutally shattered. The Los Angeles police received a chilling call. Dispatched to the tranquil San Fernando Valley home of Saturday Night Live legend Phil Hartman and his wife Brynn, the caller, a figure who will become central to the immediate unfolding drama, was identified as a show business friend of the Hartmans, a man named Ron. He was a stuntman, a profession requiring nerves of steel, yet even he was undoubtedly rattled by the events he was reporting. More significantly, Ron was also described as a good friend of Brynn's and ex-boyfriend, in fact. This detail, while potentially complicating the emotional dynamics, was reportedly something Phil was totally okay with them hanging out, suggesting a level of trust or perhaps a resigned acceptance within their complex marital landscape. According to Ron's distraught account to the authorities, Phil Hartman, the beloved comedian, had been shot in the head by Brynn. The brutal simplicity of the statement delivered an immediate shockwave, painting a picture of domestic violence of the most extreme kind. Exactly what had transpired, Ron, in his agitated state, couldn't say, his understanding clouded by the unfolding horror. He could only convey that Brynn was in a state of utter disarray, hysterical, incoherent even. Her emotional state was a maelstrom, rendering her unable to provide a lucid explanation, and, further intensifying the already alarming situation, Ron reported that she had just locked herself into the bedroom with Phil's body. This act of barricading herself with the victim, whether from grief, shock, or a deeper psychological unraveling, added an immediate layer of extreme danger and unpredictability to the scene. "All right, where's the weapon now?" The dispatcher's voice, calm amidst the chaos, cut through Ron's distress. "It's in my hands," he replied, indicating it secured the firearm, a crucial detail that mitigated one immediate threat. Still, the LAPD, operating under the principle of extreme caution in such volatile situations, was taking no chances. The fundamental, chilling reality was that the shooter was still there and we still had hot seat, meaning a potentially armed and highly unstable individual remained on the premises. Within minutes, the usually quiet upscale Encino home of the Hartmans was transformed into a tense, chaotic crime scene surrounded by squad cars and police tape. The visual juxtaposition of suburban normalcy and urgent law enforcement presence underscored the profound disruption. "We had no idea what we were facing at that particular time," admitted an officer, highlighting the inherent unpredictability of such volatile domestic incidents. Shots had been fired, and there was a shooter on the premises. The immediate and paramount concern for the responding officers was the welfare of the Hartman. Children, Phil and Brynn's 9-year-old son and 6-year-old daughter, were both in the house, undoubtedly awake and terrified after their mother's screams and the police sirens. The psychological trauma inflicted upon these innocent bystanders, caught in the terrifying vortex of their parents' tragedy, was unimaginable. They just stayed in their room fearful because they were scared. A heartbreaking detail that speaks volumes about their primal terror. Ron, demonstrating a remarkable presence of mind amidst the unfolding nightmare, acted swiftly to protect the children. He rescued Brynn and Phil's 9-year-old son on his way to meet the first officers on the scene. The image of Ron running the young boy out to safety is a stark reminder of the urgent, life-saving measures taken. The police, upon their arrival, quickly located and rescued his 6-year-old sister as well. She was found kind of cowering in the corner of a closet, a detail that vividly illustrates the profound fear and confusion that had gripped the young girl. What a nightmare for those children. A sentiment that encapsulates the profound and lasting scars such a trauma would leave. Once the Hartman children were safely evacuated from the house, the immediate threat to their lives diffused. The officers could then turn their full attention to the volatile situation inside. Our officers searched each room until we got. The only room that was left was the master bedroom. This systematic clearing of the house confirmed precise location of the armed individual, focusing their efforts. However, rather than resorting to an immediate, forceful entry, which could potentially break down the door and possibly put Brynn and the officers in danger, the police made a strategic decision. They turned the highly sensitive situation over to their specialized hostage negotiation team. The goal was clear. They're going to try to lure her out and keep her from hurting herself. This approach, prioritizing de-escalation and the preservation of life, underscored the police's professional response to a deeply volatile and emotionally charged scene. While the hostage negotiators meticulously worked to establish contact with Brynn, aiming to pierce through her veil of hysteria and incoherence, the investigators turned their attention to her friend, Ron. His account of the preceding hours was crucial, providing a fragmented yet illuminating timeline of events leading up to the tragedy. Ron relayed to the police that the chain of events had commenced the previous night with a phone call from Brynn. She calls Ron and asks him if she can come over, an appeal for companionship that, in retrospect, takes on a chilling significance. According to Brynn's own relayed information to Ron, Phil had chosen to spend the evening away from home, indulging in his private passions. Phil had spent the evening out at the rented hangar, where he kept his collection of planes and exotic cars. Phil decides that he'd like to spend the evening play with his toys. A seemingly innocuous detail that, in the context of Brynn's later actions, could be interpreted as emotional distance or neglect. Brynn, left alone, didn't feel like being alone, prompting her call to Ron. It really just seemed like she wanted someone to talk to, Ron emphasized, suggesting a need for connection, a desperate seeking of solace in the face of perceived isolation. Ron further informed the police that Brynn had indeed arrived at his place in Studio City, a short half-hour's drive from Encino. Brynn arrives at Ron's house in Studio City around 10. From Ron's perspective, upon her arrival, she had seemed a little down. This subtle observation of her demeanor suggests a pre-existing emotional fragility, a baseline of sadness that was likely exacerbated by Phil's absence. She complains a little bit about, her marriage. Ron recounted, offering the first direct glimpse into the marital discord. Brynn's specific grievances were telling. Brynn would say that Phil wasn't paying attention. Phil seems disinterested, and that there's really just no spark. These were not trivial complaints, but rather deep-seated anxieties about emotional neglect and the perceived decline of intimacy, themes that frequently recur in marriages under strain, particularly when one partner seeks constant validation and the other is emotionally withdrawn. Ron, in his role as a supportive friend, said he'd done his best to cheer Brynn up a little. Their evening together involved a few drinks. They have a few beers. This detail, while seemingly minor, would later prove significant in the unfolding toxicology report. But after a couple of hours, as the conversation deepened and the night wore on, Ron noticed a distinct shift. The lighthearted, perhaps superficial, discussions typically associated with Brynn gave way to something far more profound and unsettling. The conversation gets really heavy to the point where Brynn asked Ron if he believes in God. This was a significant deviation, a stark indication that Brynn was grappling with existential questions, perhaps wrestling with profound guilt, fear, or a desperate search for meaning. This was out of character for Brynn, Ron emphasized, highlighting the unusual nature of her inquiry and suggesting a departure from her typical persona. Still, Ron recalled that when Brynn departed his house after midnight, her demeanor seemed relatively stable. She has a couple of beers, but in general, he didn't feel that she was overly intoxicated. This assessment, however, would soon be dramatically contradicted by subsequent events. The true turning point, the Harbinger disaster, occurred at 3:30 a.m., when Brynn suddenly called Ron again. This time, her voice, her entire demeanor was dramatically altered. Ron reported that this time she had sounded very different. Brynn was hysterical and distraught and asked to come over, a desperate, frantic plea that signaled a profound crisis. Ron, attempting to offer a semblance of reason and calm, said that he had told Brynn it was too late and that she needed to go back to sleep. He likely perceived her state as extreme intoxication, believing sleep was the only remedy. But according to Ron's chilling account, Brynn had utterly ignored his advice. Her desperation, her psychological turmoil, overrode any rational counsel. They hang up the phone, and in 20 minutes or so, she shows up at his house. Her relentless pursuit of his presence underscored the depth of her distress, a frantic yearning for connection or confession. And as soon as he opened the door, Ron immediately perceived that something was wrong. The sight of Brynn at his threshold was a stark, undeniable confirmation of his earlier fears. You can see that she's obviously drunk. This was not merely a slight impairment. Her physical state was alarming. She is falling over and incapable, really, even holding herself up. Her words, too, were a chaotic jumble. Brynn was mumbling. She wasn't making much sense. Her coherent thought processes clearly overwhelmed by alcohol and possibly other substances. And then, as she stumbled across the threshold, a horrifying confession spilled from her lips, an utterance that would forever alter the course of their lives and cast a long, dark shadow over the memory of Phil Hartman. She says, "I killed Phil." Ron's initial reaction to this shocking declaration was one of profound disbelief, a natural human tendency to reject such an unthinkable statement, especially from someone in Brynn's evident state. Ron said that he didn't believe her since she was obviously drunk. His immediate, almost instinctual assessment was dismissive. He was like, "Oh, she's high as a kite." He attributed her words to the incoherent ramblings of extreme intoxication. But then, with a terrifying suddenness that ripped through his disbelief, she pulls a gun out of her handbag. This tangible, undeniable piece of evidence shattered Ron's skepticism, forcing him to confront a horrifying reality. At this point, he doesn't know what to think. The situation had spiraled from a friend's drunken confession to a chilling, tangible threat. Confronted with the undeniable reality of the firearm, Ron's training as a stuntman, perhaps, or simply his primal instinct for self-preservation and crisis management, kicked in. So Ron said he'd done the first things he could think of. His immediate actions were pragmatic and geared towards de-escalation. Take the gun from Brynn and give her some coffee. Disarming her was paramount, removing the immediate instrument of potential further harm. The coffee, a desperate attempt to counteract the effect of alcohol, reflected his underlying hope that she was merely intoxicated and hallucinating. For the next 2 hours, Ron just tries to sober her up, a grueling, emotionally draining vigil as he grappled with the enormity of her confession and the terrifying possibility that it might be true. By 6 a.m., as the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, Brynn's state had reportedly improved, albeit marginally. Brynn was a bit more sober, allowing for a semblance of coherent thought to return. At this point, Ron, still wrestling with a cocktail of disbelief and growing dread, made a fateful decision, So Ron said they'd driven over to Hartman's. A journey fueled by a desperate hope that Brynn's confession was merely a drunken nightmare, not a grim reality. Not that he really expected to find Phil dead. The psychological defense mechanism of denial was powerful, making it incredibly difficult to accept such a monstrous possibility from Friend. This is a hard story for anyone to believe, especially if you've known Brynn. He was still caught in the agonizing limbo of uncertainty. He's still not sure she's just babbling incoherently or if she's serious. But the agonizing uncertainty was about to be replaced by a brutal, undeniable truth. Brynn, her steps perhaps unsteady, led him into the Hartman's home, past the silent, unsuspecting rooms where her children slept, and ultimately into the master bedroom. There, the horrific sight confirmed her earlier drunken confession. Ron sees that Phil is lying on his bed. It's obvious that he's dead. The sight must have been utterly shattering, transforming the vague, terrifying threat into a concrete, irreversible tragedy. In a disturbing psychological twist, Ron observed that Brynn had started screaming hysterically at the sight of her husband's body, as if she was as surprised by the discovery as he was. This reaction, if truly genuine, suggests a profound dissociation, perhaps a blackout during the act, or a mind so ravaged by substances that the reality of her actions only truly registered upon seeing. The lifeless form of her husband, she apparently was so whacked that she wasn't clear in her mind whether she had really killed her or not, a chilling insight into the profound impact of her intoxication. Once Ron grasped the undeniable fact of Phil's death, his actions became swift and decisive. He stepped out of the bedroom to call 911, initiating the formal emergency response that would soon bring law enforcement to the scene. In a parallel and profoundly unsettling development, as Ron made his desperate call, Brynn locks the door behind him. This act of barricading herself, again, within the bedroom, alongside her deceased husband, amplified the psychological drama. And simultaneously, while Ron was on the phone with the police, she's also simultaneously on the phone, and she's calling either family or friends, and she's telling them what happened. The act of calling people in order to just make it more real is a fascinating, if disturbing, psychological compulsion. It speaks to a desperate need for external validation of her reality, a way to anchor herself to the horrific truth she had seemingly struggled to fully comprehend. Hello, I just shot Phil. No, still doesn't seem real. Hello, I just shot Phil. Still doesn't seem real. These repeated, almost mantra-like confessions suggest a mind grappling with a profound sense of unreality, a desperate attempt to force the unfathomable into the realm of the concrete. I can just see her try and make it like, how could that happen? The internal struggle was palpable, a woman caught between the monstrous act and her own disbelief. So that's kind of going on at the same time while Ron is in the hallway. I'm calling the police. The scene was one of bifurcated horror. Two individuals on their phones, grappling with the same unspeakable tragedy from wildly different perspectives. But as the wail of approaching sirens grew louder, their insistent cries signaling the imminent arrival of authority, the horrifying reality of what she had done finally, irrevocably sunk in. The external world, with its undeniable consequences, pierced through the haze of her intoxication and dissociation. Phil was dead, a fact no amount of internal denial or repeated confession could alter. At that critical moment, caught between the siren's piercing wail and the chilling finality of her actions, she was on the phone to her sister. Her last known words, imbued with a profound sense of desperation and maternal concern, were a poignant plea. She spoke to her sister and said, "Please take care of the kids." It was a final, heart-wrenching act of mother, however flawed, attempting to secure the future of her children, knowing her own was irrevocably lost. By then, the precision and professionalism of law enforcement had taken hold. The police had the Hartman Encino home cordoned off and just in time. The protective barrier of yellow tape was not merely a procedural measure. It was a necessary bulwark against the encroaching chaos. Already, the media started to convene down the block, their cameras and microphones poised, their relentless pursuit of breaking news creating a palpable buzz. This was, undeniably, about to become a huge media circus. This is, a huge story. The confluence of a beloved celebrity victim and a shocking domestic tragedy ensured that the world's attention would be riveted on the unfolding events, transforming a private nightmare into a public spectacle. However, just before the cameras could go live, before the relentless narrative of speculation and sensationalism could fully take hold, a crucial breakthrough occurred. The hostage negotiators, working diligently and with an unwavering focus on de-escalation, finally managed to get through to Brynn's cell phone. This direct line of communication was vital. So they know she's inside. They want to know what happened. They want to talk to her. The primary objective remained to establish rapport, to understand the final situation was inside, and most critically, to hopefully talk her into unlocking the bedroom door. Their overriding concern was for her safety, but also a pragmatic consideration. They were concerned for their own safety, too. If it came to breaking down the door, if an officer had to go see there, he'd be a big target. The inherent dangers of a forced entry underscore the urgency of a peaceful resolution. Recognizing that time was of the essence, and that direct negotiation was proving difficult, the supervisor at the scene initiated a tactical maneuver. 2 officers were dispatched around the back of the house to the bedroom window. This strategic positioning was designed to create a diversion, a common tactic in high-stakes standoffs. What normally happens in a situation like that, where you're trying to create a diversion, is somebody will break a window to divert the person's attention and then make entry. It was a preparatory step, a readying for the inevitable if negotiations failed, and it looked increasingly as if the time to act was fast approaching. The negotiators, despite their best efforts, were making little headway with Brynn. Her responses were fraught with despair, indicative of a mind teetering on the precipice of a full-blown crisis. She told them, "I don't know what to do." This expression of utter helplessness, coupled with her next chilling utterance, revealed the profound psychological distress consuming her. As the officers made their final preparations to break down the door, it became terrifyingly clear that Brynn was approaching the crisis point. Her words resonated with an almost unbearable finality. She's telling them that her life is over. The tragic climax, it seemed, was now not a matter of if, but when. By 6:30 on the morning of May 28, 1998, the grim tableau outside comedian Phil Hartman's Encino home was rapidly evolving into a full-blown spectacle. A small, yet steadily growing, crowd of curious onlookers had begun to gather, drawn by the undeniable magnetism of unfolding tragedy. They stood shoulder to shoulder with an ever-increasing phalanx of news camera crews, their lenses glinting in the burgeoning daylight, eager to capture every detail of what promised to be a major national story. The yellow tape is up, the crunching tape. The ubiquitous symbol of a crime scene now demarcated the boundary between the private agony within and the public fascination without. The media's there. Their presence signaled the transformation of a personal horror into a collective public event. It had been less than half an hour since a friend of Hartman's wife, Brynn, had made the harrowing 911 call, relaying news that was almost impossible to process. "I can't tell you what happened." The words of the caller were saturated with shock and disbelief, a raw, unfiltered expression of the incomprehensible. The incident was immediately recognized as a really high-profile case, the total media circus, its gravity magnified by the celebrity status of the victim. The welfare of Phil and Brynn's children, ages 6 and 9, had been the immediate priority. They had been removed from the house shortly after the police arrived, whisked away from the scene of their parents' tragedy. I can't imagine the terror they must have felt, a profoundly empathetic sentiment that highlights the indelible scar left on their young psyches. But their mother, Brynn, remained ensnared in the nightmare she created. Brynn has locked herself into the room with her dead husband, and police are trying to negotiate her to come out. The standoff continued, a tense, agonizing wait for an uncertain outcome. However, even as the standoff dragged on, the media and, by extension, the entire country, struggled to reconcile the first shocking reports from the scene with the public persona of the beloved comedian. The story broke. You just thought, wow, that just doesn't make sense. The collective disbelief was palpable, a desperate attempt to find logic in the illogical. One of America's most beloved comedians, a man synonymous with laughter and good humor, was dead, and his swimsuit model wife, a woman whose public image was one of beauty and glamour, appeared to be the killer. The question on most people's minds was, why? This collective inquiry, this yearning for explanation, underscored the profound cognitive dissonance triggered by the tragedy. Yet, as is often the case in such deeply personal dramas, those within the couple's inner circle, those privy to the less than glamorous realities behind the public facade, already knew the answer, or at least had a clearer, albeit tragic, understanding of the forces at play. They had witnessed the slow, insidious decay of a relationship that the world had perceived as perfect. On the red carpet, under the blinding flash of paparazzi cameras, it might have appeared that the superstar comedian truly had it all. The image was one of effortless charm, of a man utterly at ease in his success. Can I introduce you to your wife? This is my lovely wife, Brynn. Phil's public persona was indeed very charming, very outgoing personality when he was in public or performing. His wit was sharp, his smile infectious, his ability to connect with an audience undeniable. Time of my life, I've got to realize that I had struggled in Hollywood for many years. I know a good job when I have one. These were the words of a man who appreciated his success, a testament to his long, arduous journey to the top. But beneath that carefully constructed public persona, the comedian was, by many accounts, an intensely private man. This dichotomy between his effusive public self and his reserved private nature formed a critical, psychological element in the tragedy. He was described as very gruff, emotionally distant, emotionally unavailable. This emotional detachment, this inability or unwillingness to fully connect on a deep personal level, created an isolating barrier. People felt like they didn't really know him, that he was kind of putting up some kind of a wall. And tragically, he had constructed this emotional barricade against everyone, even Brynn, in the intimate sphere of their marriage. The very person who craved attention, the most felt consistently neglected. He wasn't paying attention. He was being aloof. He would just be emotionally unavailable. This consistent emotional withdrawal, while perhaps a coping mechanism for the pressures of his career or an inherent personality trait, became a corrosive force in their relationship. And that emotional unavailability was particularly devastating for Brynn, a woman whose entire self-concept was deeply intertwined with external validation. The former model wasn't accustomed to being ignored. Her early life, her success in modeling, had conditioned her to thrive on attention, on being seen and admired. She was used to a law of attention, a foundational element of her identity. According to friends, the more Phil withdrew, the more profound and insidious Brynn's insecurity became. The lack of his emotional engagement created a gaping void that she desperately tried to fill. It was a dark time for her. Her psychological state spiraled into a vortex of self-doubt and fear. She is feeling unsafe, insecure, and concerned about her marriage, emotions that often fester when one feels emotionally abandoned by a partner. To make matters worse, she carried the heavy burden of perceived sacrifice, a fundamental imbalance in their marital dynamic that she felt keenly. She had, after all, given up so much to marry Phil in the first place. In 1986, when Phil extended the invitation for Brynn to join him in New York, she had, with a mix of hope and calculated ambition, been happy to walk away from her career as a swimsuit model. But this decision was not, in her mind, an abdication of her own aspirations. Far from it. She had always intended to be more than a wife and mother, roles that, while fulfilling for many, felt limiting to her restless spirit. Because in her mind, marrying Phil wasn't so much the end of her career as the start of a new, more promising phase. She had dreams of making it big in showbiz, too. The relocation to New York was not simply an act of wifely devotion. She wasn't just following Phil. It was a continuation of her own deeply ingrained ambition. She was still following the same dream that had already taken her a long way from her tiny hometown of Thief River Falls. Her desire was singular and unwavering. She wanted to make a name for herself. So, while Phil ascended to unparalleled comedic heights as an indispensable member of the Saturday Night Live cast, Brynn embarked on her own parallel, yet increasingly frustrating journey. She had started going on auditions, diligently pursuing roles, attempting to get her face on camera. Her ambition also extended to writing. She also started writing. She was working with a very well-known writer on a screenplay. Her efforts were genuine, her drive undeniable, and she, perhaps naively, figured that being married to one of the stars of Saturday Live would give her an advantage over the thousands of other hopefuls trying to score a screen credit. In her strategic thinking, Phil was not just her husband. He was her way to get in. She was trying to get Phil to help her. The assumption was that his influence, his connections, would naturally open doors for her. However, Phil, immersed in the relentless demands of his booming career, found himself in an unenviable position. He had his own booming career to consider. The reality was that Phil would like to have helped Brynn, but he was so busy with guest shots, movies, SNL, voiceovers. His schedule was a perpetual whirlwind of creative obligations, leaving him with precious little time or energy to actively champion Brynn's ambitions. He was stretched to his absolute limit, to the point that he could barely keep up with all the authors. The cruel irony was that while people really paid attention to him, a relentless, admiring gaze, no one was paying attention to Brynn. Her efforts, despite her proximity to fame, consistently met with rejection and indifference. She was getting no success. The industry, as unforgiving as it was glamorous, proved impervious to her efforts. It doesn't seem that she was in any kind of demand by anybody, as a writer or an actress or anything. The dream that fueled her journey from Thief River Falls to Hollywood was slowly, agonizingly, dying. And as Phil's star continued its ascent, casting an ever larger shadow, Brynn's own sense of unfulfilled ambition curdled into a corrosive jealousy. The higher Phil climbed, the more jealous Brynn became. This wasn't merely envy. It was a deep-seated resentment, a feeling of being eclipsed and diminished by the very person she loved. The resentment, really kicked in. It became a pervasive, toxic presence in their marriage, a bitter truth that she readily shared with friends. Her grievances were clear, that Phil won't help her, that she is now stuck being a housewife. And she doesn't want to be a housewife. This perceived entrapment, this forced relinquishment of her own aspirations in favor of a domestic role she despised, fueled her anger. He couldn't turn her into a star, and that's what she wanted. This profound disappointment, the unfulfilled expectation that her husband would be the key to her own success, was a gaping wound. In fact, Brynn did little to conceal her burgeoning resentment, even in public forums. Instances were noted where Phil, is being interviewed and she's off the side. The subtle cues, the body language, the unspoken narratives conveyed a powerful message. The look on her face told me, she hated being off to the side. Her desire for the spotlight was so intense that being relegated to the periphery, even of her husband's fame, was a deeply painful experience. This resentment was not merely passive. It actively manifested in destructive ways, even on set. She would come to the set, and they would fight. These weren't quiet, private disagreements. They were public spectacles of marital discord, disrupting the professional environment. Things deteriorated to such an extent that some friends and colleagues even wondered if Brynn was actually trying to sabotage Phil's career. The suggestion was chilling. Brynn affected his performances, and that she could mess with his head before he went on, if she timed it right. This implies a deliberate, calculated cruelty, a weaponization of their intimacy to inflict maximum emotional damage. She knew where to hurt him. She knew where to hit him. The psychological dynamic was one of escalating conflict, of a wife whose unfulfilled ambitions and festering resentments had transformed into a potent, destructive force within the marriage. By the time Phil ultimately made the decision to leave Saturday Night Live in 1994, the entire cast and crew knew that his marriage was in serious trouble. The carefully constructed facade of Phil and Brynn is a happy, golden couple that was starting to crumble, its cracks painfully visible to those who worked closely with them. Even when the couple made the strategic decision to return to California, hoping for a fresh start and a more stable family life, Brynn and Phil's relationship continued its agonizing descent into disrepair. The move, intended to alleviate pressures, instead highlighted the persistent, unresolved issues that plagued their union. The impending arrival of Brynn's 40th birthday cast a particularly dark and unforgiving shadow over her psyche. For Brynn, this is a very difficult time. In a profession like modeling, where youth and physical perfection are paramount currencies, aging can be a brutal reckoning. Youth was so important to her, and seemed so important in terms of her appeal. The relentless emphasis on physical beauty in her chosen field had, tragically, become inextricably linked to her self-worth. Brynn, with a fierce desperation, attempted to defy the inevitable passage of time. Her whole thing was, what surgery can I have? What can I have lifted, burned off? How can I stay young? These were the desperate inquiries of a woman battling not just a natural aging process, but a profound internal crisis of identity and perceived diminishing value. The relentless pursuit of cosmetic procedures became a tangible manifestation of her escalating insecurity, a futile attempt to cling to a fleeting ideal. However, surgery could only do so much. The reality was that she was losing the battle, a heartbreaking concession to the unstoppable march of time. And I know that affected her deeply. The cumulative weight of these pressures, the unfulfilled career dreams, the deteriorating marriage, and the agonizing battle against physical aging sent Brynn spiraling. Brynn fell into this depression, a profound emotional chasm that would only be exacerbated by her past struggles. And that depression, rather than being addressed constructively, led her down a familiar, perilous path, a return to self-destructive coping mechanisms. When Brynn first arrived in Hollywood in the early 1980s, drugs were everywhere. The intoxicating allure of the party scene, the ready availability of substances, created a treacherous environment. Quaaludes and cocaine, it just became so accessible. And like almost everyone else caught in the gravitational pull of that hedonistic era, she had a hard time saying no. It was, as the narrative aptly observes, a little bit of a cliche in Hollywood. A young girl comes into town with dreams and winds up getting caught in drugs and alcohol. This phase of her life, marked by substance abuse, had reportedly appeared to be over by the time she met Phil. Indeed, Brynn had seemingly achieved a period of sobriety, a testament to her capacity for self-improvement. Brynn and we got sober in the 80s, a friend recalled. But as her marriage and career began their painful disintegration, the coping mechanism she had seemingly abandoned resurfaced with a vengeance. She coped in a way that she used when she was younger, drugs and alcohol. This relapse, a tragically common pattern in addiction, only served to amplify her pre-existing emotional turmoil. The insidious cocktail of substances only made her jealousy, resentment, and anger far worse. The ugly part of her personality, the darker aspects of her psyche, it came out when she drank. It came out when she did cocaine. The substances stripped away inhibitions, unleashing a torrent of destructive emotions. This is very disturbing for Phil. He was caught in an agonizing bind, witnessing the unraveling of the woman he had married, the mother of his children. He knows that this isn't good for Brynn. It's not good for the family. He was dealing with a woman who was out of control, sober 1 minute, not the next. The unpredictability, the constant tightrope walk between lucidity and intoxication, created an environment of profound instability and fear within the home. Once the family returned to California, Brynn's struggle intensified, leading to the next 4 years in and out of rehab and seeing psychiatrists for depression. The desperate cycle of recovery and relapse underscored the depth of her addiction and mental health. Struggles. By that time, she was in pretty much hell. The addiction was full-blown. The demons had taken root, consuming her. Anyone who really knew her knew what she was struggling with. The demons were deep. In a glimmer of hope, a desperate attempt to find a path out of the encroaching darkness, Brynn's doctors, in April of 1998, had prescribed her a new medication to combat her depression. She was prescribed Zoloft to help boost her mood and possibly just help her feel better. It was, in many ways, her last chance, a final roll of the dice in a desperate bid for emotional stability. Because by this point, Phil, having weathered years of tumultuous marital strife, addiction, and emotional turmoil, was running out of patience. His efforts to help her, however well-intentioned, were proving futile, like trying to help a drowning person. It's ugly. They struggle. They push you down. He was being pulled under by the weight of her struggles. I don't think he wanted to break up the family unit. His desire was to preserve the sanctity of their home, to protect his children from the chaos. But he would if he had to. The line had been drawn, the limits of his endurance reached. In fact, at the beginning of May, just weeks before the tragedy, he had delivered a clear, unequivocal ultimatum to Brynn. The stakes were incredibly high. He was going to leave with the kids if she didn't get sober. This was not an idle threat, but a desperate measure born profound concern for his children's well-being. He wanted his children to grow up as normal as one can in a show business environment. The incessant cycle of rehab, relapse, and domestic strife was antithetical to that vision. And having Mom continually in a rehab center or what have you would certainly have negated that. Phil's unwavering commitment to providing a stable environment for his children was paramount. But now, just a few weeks after that fateful ultimatum, his hope of a normal childhood for his children had been tragically shattered. After a night permeated by the insidious influence of drinking and drugs, Brynn had apparently done the unthinkable, allowing the darkest forces within her to take hold. The demons took over and boom. The culmination of years of struggle, compounded by the potent cocktail of substances and emotional distress, had led to an act of unimaginable violence. But would the killing stop there? The question loomed with chilling uncertainty. Locked in the master bedroom with Phil's lifeless body, Brynn had just endured several tense minutes on the phone with the police. The trained negotiators, deploying every psychological tool at their disposal, were desperately trying to lure her out and keep her from hurting herself. Their objective was clear: de-escalation, the preservation of life, the prevention of further tragedy. But Brynn, consumed by a maelstrom of emotions, by then was through talking. The fragile thread of communication had snapped, severing the last vestiges of hope for a peaceful resolution. At a little after 6 a.m. on the morning of May 28, 1998, the harrowing 911 call from Brynn Hartman's friend had irrevocably altered the course of events. Brynn's husband, the legendary Saturday Night Live star Phil Hartman, was dead. A fact confirmed with chilling certainty. It was obviously a very high-profile case. Its gravity immediately understood by the Los Angeles Police Department, who wasted no time in rushing to the Hartmans' Encino home. But by the time the first responders arrived, The situation had escalated to an even more dangerous and psychologically complex level. Brynn had barricaded herself into the master bedroom with Phil's body. This act of self-imprisonment, a woman trapped with a horrific consequence of her actions, signaled the beginning of the end. The police, employing their most skilled negotiators, had spent several tense minutes on the phone with Brynn, trying to talk her down, desperately attempting to pierce through the veil of her despair and induce her to surrender, peacefully. But the emotional and psychological pressure, combined with the potent influence of the substances in her system, proved to be an insurmountable barrier. Before they could convince her to open the door, before they could offer a path out of the agonizing impasse, she hung up on them. The sudden cessation of communication was a terrifying indicator that the situation was about to take a turn for the worse. And just seconds later, even as they prepared to storm into the bedroom, their last recourse to gain entry, a chilling sound echoed through the house. They hear another shot fired, the deafening crack of a gunshot, following the abrupt silence, sent a jolt of dread through the assembled officers, confirming their gravest fears. Fearing the absolute worst, knowing that precious seconds could mean the difference between life and death, or, more accurately, between one tragedy and another, officers rushed into the master bedroom. They forced their way inside, realizing that they needed to go in now, the urgency of the moment overriding all other considerations. Inside, the scene was one of unspeakable horror, a tableau of broken lives and shattered dreams. They found the beloved comedian sprawled on the bed, his form lifeless. Mr. Hartman had been shot just above the eyebrow through the head, a precise, devastating wound that left no doubt as to the cause of death. Beside him, in a final, tragic embrace with a man she had loved and destroyed, Brynn lay beside him, a gun still in her hand. The second shot, the chilling sound that had pierced the dawn, was quickly understood. Both were dead. The entire agonizing tragedy, from the initial 911 call to the final, fatal shot, was over with a brutal efficiency, ending in time to make the morning news. The immediate aftermath was a maelstrom of media frenzy and public grief. News anchors, their voices heavy with the weight of the moment, delivered the shocking details. Now to the shooting death of comedian Phil Hartman, more details are emerging about what happened. The emotional impact was profound and widespread. "I could not have been more shocked," one colleague lamented, articulating the collective disbelief felt by millions. Of all the people at Saturday Night Live that you would expect to meet an untimely end, Phil Hartman was the last person you would have expected. This sentiment underscored the tragic irony of a man who brought so much joy meeting such a horrific, and a stark juxtaposition that was difficult for the public to reconcile. But while the sudden, violent nature of the tragedy had indeed been a shock to the comedian's fans, a collective trauma for those who only knew his public persona, those closest to him and to Brynn, his close friends, family, and former SNL co-workers, held a far more somber understanding. They all knew that the relationship had been on the brink of disaster. The public narrative of perfection had, for them, long since been replaced by the grim reality of escalating conflict. "I was not surprised that she had killed him," one insider chillingly admitted, a statement that speaks volumes about the depth of the marital dysfunction they had witnessed. Given what I had seen, given the little bits and pieces he had told me, there was a lot of very disturbing stuff that was going on behind the scenes in Phil's life. The phrase disturbing stuff is a euphemism for the insidious, corrosive forces that had been eating away at the foundation of their marriage. Marital trouble, depression, addiction. The insidious grip of substance abuse, in particular, was no secret to those in their inner circle. She had been dealing with alcohol issues and cocaine addiction for a long time, a chronic struggle that severely compromised her judgment and emotional stability. And on the night of May 27, 1998, a night that would culminate in unimaginable tragedy, Brynn had apparently reached her breaking point. The final straw, the ultimate pressure cooker, came in the form of Phil's desperate ultimatum. Friends confirmed that Phil had even threatened to leave with the kids if Brynn didn't get sober. This was not just a threat. It was a desperate plea for stability, a final boundary set by a man who had exhausted all other options in trying to save his family. But instead of catalyzing sobriety, it seems to have triggered a profound psychological cascade, pushing Brynn further into the abyss. He didn't know how to handle her. Things were spinning out of control. The sense of helplessness and escalating chaos was palpable. Precisely what sequence of events led directly to the shooting, the specific words exchanged, or the final moments of confrontation, the police weren't sure. The immediate, chaotic aftermath made a clear, linear reconstruction impossible. All they knew for certain, based on Ron's account and the subsequent investigation, was that Brynn was feeling depressed when she left her friend's house after midnight, and that 3 hours later, she showed up on his doorstep again, drunk, and announced that she had just shot Phil. This left a critical, terrifying gap in the timeline. There's this window between 1 and probably 3:30, where we don't know what happened. This void in information, the psychological black box, allowed for conjecture. We can only speculate that there might have been an argument between Brynn and Phil. And whether they had argued earlier or not, the grim reality was that at some point Brynn had apparently crept up on her sleeping husband with a gun. This detail paints a horrifying picture of calculated violence, a chilling act against a vulnerable, unsuspecting victim. Using Phil's own .38, Brynn shot him 3 times. The repeated discharge of the firearm underscores the ferocity of the attack. She shot him in the chest and the neck, and point blank in the face. These were not random shots. They were deliberate, aimed to inflict maximum damage, to ensure no chance of survival. That much the police could say for certain. Their conclusions drawn from a meticulous combination of forensics and Brynn's own statements. The chilling details of her confessions, made in those frantic moments before the police arrived, provided crucial corroboration. She called 3 or 4 different people, confessed to them what had happened, so that's kind of the way it was pieced together. These desperate, fragmented admissions served as a dark tapestry, allowing investigators to reconstruct the tragic events. Brynn, in her agitated and incoherent state, hadn't articulated precisely just what caused her to snap, the specific trigger that led to such an unthinkable act. But her actions, the chaotic nature of the event, and the subsequent psychological unraveling led police to conclude that the crime wasn't premeditated. This distinction was crucial in understanding the psychological state of the perpetrator. This feels to me like a situation where there was irrational judgment driven by rage and anger and frustration, the culmination of years of emotional distress, addiction, and unfulfilled dreams that erupted in a sudden, explosive act of violence, rather than a coldly calculated murder. And there was definite evidence that Brynn hadn't been thinking clearly that evening. The toxicology report provided stark, undeniable proof of her impaired state. The toxicology report showed that she was under the influence of drugs when it happened. The cocktail of substances found in her system was profoundly compromising. In her system is cocaine, alcohol, marijuana, and she's still on her antidepressants. This potent mix, a recipe for severe cognitive and emotional disinhibition, undeniably played a critical role in her actions. But when her drug-fueled rage had momentarily subsided, when the intoxicating haze began to recede, Brynn, in a moment of agonizing clarity, knew deep down when she came out of her haze what she had done. The full, crushing weight of her actions, the irrevocable horror of having murdered her husband, descended upon her. It was horrible, and then she tried to solve it with another tragedy. The guilt, the despair, the profound realization of the irreversible damage she had inflicted became an unbearable burden. In a final, desperate act of self-annihilation, she took her own life. She sat down next to him and, pow, 1 bullet for the brain. This was not a moment of continued rage, but rather one of profound self-condemnation and ultimate despair. Using a second gun kept in the bedroom, a stark reminder of the accessibility of firearms in the household, she ended her own life. They had multiple guns in their home. Phil had a .38. Brynn had a .38 of her own. Brynn had used her own .38 to kill herself. The final act was a clear manifestation of unbearable remorse. She obviously could not live with guilt. She couldn't live with this knowing what she had done. That was unequivocally, basically the official conclusion. It was a murder-suicide. Once the Los Angeles Police Department formally declared the case closed, satisfied with the forensic evidence and the sequence of events, Phil's grieving family and most of the couple's friends made a concerted effort to try and move past the tragedy. The Hartman family, with a quiet dignity, sadly accepted the police's findings, attempting to find some semblance of closure in the devastating official conclusion. The media, however, adopted a far more aggressive and sensationalist approach. They seized upon the official findings as a springboard for any number of sensational stories about Brynn's drug and alcohol abuse and how it had claimed the life of the beloved comedian. The narrative quickly solidified, painting a stark, unambiguous picture of culpability. She became the villain. The headlines, the reports, the pervasive public discourse relentlessly framed her as the sole perpetrator, the embodiment of evil. The media reports seemed to paint her as this terrible monster, a two-dimensional caricature that erased the complexities of her psychological struggles and the long, agonizing breakdown of her mental health. But there was one group of people who vehemently disagreed with this prevailing narrative, a dissenting voice raised against the tide of public condemnation: Brynn's family. The family really struggled with being able to believe that Brynn would be able to do this. For them, the monstrous portrayal of Brynn was utterly irreconcilable with the woman they knew and loved. Brynn was not a monster. She was a smart, loving woman, they insisted, desperately attempting to reclaim her humanity from the sensationalist clutches of the media, convinced in their deepest conviction that Brynn wasn't responsible for her husband's murder in the way the public was portraying it. The Amdahl family took extraordinary legal action. In May of 1999, almost exactly 1 year after the tragedy, they filed a wrongful death civil suit against what they believed was to blame Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. In their landmark lawsuit, Brynn's family put forth compelling, albeit controversial, claim. They alleged that Pfizer, the pharmaceutical giant, had intentionally downplayed the dangerous side effects of their antidepressant drug, Zoloft. Their argument centered on the insidious ways certain medications can alter the human psyche, leading to unforeseen and devastating consequences. The Amdahl family was citing the recent findings that said that Zoloft could have side effects, including violent behavior. This was a bold accusation, challenging perceived safety of a widely prescribed medication. In some cases, such side effects could allegedly be attributed to high levels of depression, suicidal thoughts, and, crucially, a propensity for aggressive actions. The lawsuit claimed it was no mere coincidence, but rather a direct causal link, that Brynn had only started taking the drug 1 month before the shooting. The timing, they argued, was critically significant, suggesting a direct correlation between the new medication and the tragic outcome. Brynn was seeking professional help, and she was prescribed Zoloft. The inference was clear. It might have just been some kind of horrible chemical interaction that caused this, suggesting that the drug, rather than the woman, was the ultimate culprit. And the timing of her prescription, though compelling, wasn't the sole piece of evidence the lawsuit cited. They also pointed to the findings of Brynn's autopsy, the scientific examination of her physical and chemical state at the time of her death. Brynn's system contained large amounts of Zoloft. This fact, combined with the new scientific understanding of the drug's potential side effects, bolstered the family's argument. As far as Brynn's family was concerned, This evidence meant, unequivocally, that she was innocent of Phil's murder, at least in the traditional sense of culpability. Brynn's family and supporters disputed that she was capable of killing her husband under normal circumstances when in her right mind. I don't think she was in her right mind at all when she pulled the trigger, they asserted, arguing that the drug had fundamentally altered her psychological state, removing her agency and control. But would a jury, confronted with the agonizing complexity of the case, agree with this pharmaceutical defense, or would jurors, influenced by the sensationalized media reports and the undeniable facts of the murder-suicide, see the lawsuit as a desperate act by a family in denial? The profound psychological impact of such a tragedy often leads to a desperate search for external blame. The pain of having a family member perpetrate a violent and destructive act is so difficult to accept and understand. In the wake of such incomprehensible events, tragedies like this happen. People look for something to blame. The human need for a rational explanation, for a definable cause, is powerful, especially when confronted with the seemingly irrational. For its part, Pfizer, the defendant in the wrongful death lawsuit, vehemently denied any responsibility for Brynn's actions. Their defense was robust, focusing on individual responsibility and the known dangers of polysubstance abuse. Pfizer countered with the toxicology reports that stated that Brynn was not only under the influence of Zoloft, but also cocaine and alcohol. This was a critical point. The presence of multiple powerful substances, both illicit and prescribed, significantly complicated the causal analysis. We're not supposed to drink and do drugs while we're on medication, a fundamental directive from medical professionals. And part of that is because it changes everything within the medication, creating unpredictable and dangerous interactions beyond the pharmaceutical aspects. There was also plenty of other evidence suggesting that Brynn and Phil's relationship could have come to its deadly conclusion without Zoloft playing a role. The deep-seated marital issues, the long history of conflict, provided an alternative, equally compelling, narrative of causation. There were plenty of witnesses able to talk about the tumultuous relationship between Brynn and Phil. The reality was that there was a lot of drama. It seemed to just be getting worse. This escalating pattern of marital discord, combined with Brynn's chronic drug abuse and her increasingly fragile mental state, added up to a profoundly unstable situation. It was a recipe for disaster, a tragic confluence of factors that, regardless of Zoloft, seemed to be hurtling towards a destructive end. All of that combination led to, I think, poor judgment, poor impulse control, and a tragedy. The analytical conclusion pointed to a complex interplay of personal choices, psychological vulnerabilities, and the insidious grip of addiction rather than a singular pharmaceutical cause. In May of 1999, the family of Brynn Hartman, grappling with the profound grief and the unbearable weight of public condemnation, had initiated their powerful wrongful death lawsuit against Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. This legal action was a direct challenge to the prevailing narrative that had cast Brynn as a heartless killer. A year prior, the former swimsuit model had, in an act of unimaginable violence, shot and killed her husband, the famed comedian and beloved former Saturday Night Live cast member Phil Hartman. The horror had been compounded by her subsequent act. She had then taken her own life, leaving behind 2 orphaned children and a nation in shock. This plays out like a Greek tragedy, an apt descriptor for a story so replete with elements of fate, flawed characters, and devastating consequences. According to the family's lawsuit, the ultimate responsibility for this profoundly disturbing tragedy lay with Zoloft, the Pfizer-manufactured antidepressant that Brynn had only begun taking just a month prior to the shootings. The family contended that Pfizer had deliberately been downplaying the side effects of Zoloft, particularly those dark and dangerous potential side effects such as violent outbursts and suicidal thoughts. For Brynn's family, This was not merely a legal argument, but a desperate, heartfelt plea for understanding and exoneration. This evidence, they believed, was absolute proof that she was not a heartless killer. Instead, they argued, she was under the influence of prescription drugs. Her actions controlled by external chemical forces, not malicious intent. There were certain chemicals in her mind that made her believe the only solution was to take a gun and put it to her husband's head and kill him. This psychological defense shifted the blame from Brynn's conscious to the insidious, unintended consequences of a medication. However, according to the pharmaceutical company, Pfizer, those chemicals were not solely their responsibility, nor could they be solely attributed to Zoloft. Their defense was firm and rooted in the undeniable facts of her broader substance abuse. She can also blame cocaine and alcohol that were allegedly in her system, Pfizer's legal team contended, highlighting the polydrug toxicity that was present in Brynn's body. The presence of these illicit substances, in conjunction with the antidepressant, made it virtually impossible to isolate Zoloft as the single causal agent. So, the fundamental question remained, suspended in the court of public opinion and the intricate machinery of the legal system. So just who or what was to blame? In the end, the ultimate answer remained elusive, shrouded in complexities of human psychology, pharmaceutical science, and personal choice. We may never know. A sobering acknowledgement of the inherent limitations in definitively pinpointing blame in such multifaceted tragedies. Ultimately, Pfizer settled out of court with her family, rather than endure the protracted, costly, and potentially damaging public spectacle of a full trial. Pfizer paid the Amdahl family an undisclosed amount to close the lawsuit. This settlement, while providing some financial relief to the grieving family, did not necessarily equate to an admission of guilt on Pfizer's part. I don't think it necessarily means that they were guilty in any way, observed one analyst. I think it was just their way of doing damage control. The pharmaceutical giant, acutely aware of the potential for negative publicity and its impact on their public image and stock value, likely chose to minimize potential harm through a private settlement. They were very concerned about negative publicity, a pragmatic decision driven by corporate interests rather than a definitive legal conclusion on culpability. Whatever temporary damage the publicity surrounding the lawsuit might have done to Pfizer's formidable reputation, an untimely death, in Phil Hartman's case, has done remarkably little to dim Phil Hartman's enduring legacy. His comedic genius, his profound impact on the landscape of American entertainment, transcended the brutal circumstances of his demise. Even though he's gone, it's obvious that his life's legacy will live on. He is, deservedly, really looked at as one of the greats. The earlier assertion that, if there were a Mount Rushmore of Saturday Night Live, Phil would be on there rings truer than ever. His body of work, his unforgettable characters, his effortless comedic timing, continue to inspire and entertain new generations. However, like other tragically lost Saturday Night Live cast members before their time, the fond memories of the laughs Phil gave to millions will be tinged with regret for the jokes, the skits, and the characters he never got to create. The poignant realization of unfulfilled potential of a comedic genius silenced too soon adds a layer of sorrow to his otherwise brilliant legacy. If Phil had not been killed, I think his career would have just climbed by leaps and bounds, a sentiment echoed by many who recognized his limitless talent, in a testament to his enduring impact. Even death could not fully halt the momentum of his career. He got an Emmy nomination for News Radio of the Year after he died, a posthumous honor that underscored his extraordinary talent and the industry's deep respect for him. Phil Hartman was, appropriately and deservedly, given a star on the Walk of Fame, a tangible, public monument to his contributions to Hollywood, other than his impressive body of work. It's Hartman's only monument, a lasting tribute to a man who brought so much light into the world. In a final, fitting act of remembrance after his tragic death, Phil Hartman was cremated, and his ashes were scattered across the beautiful, sun-drenched expanse of Catalina Island. He was a beach guy. He was kind of a surfer dude, a reflection of his laid-back California upbringing and his affinity for the ocean. So I think it was a fitting tribute, a peaceful, natural resting place that resonated with his spirit, and in a poignant, almost poetic conclusion that spoke volumes about the enduring, complex bond they shared. Brynn's ashes were scattered alongside his. This final act, a shared resting place, transcend the horrors of their end, speaking to the intricate, often beautiful, sometimes tragic, entanglement of their lives. He did stay with her through all the ups and downs, for better or worse. They were intertwined in life, and they remained intertwined in death. This final, somber detail offers profound, if melancholic, reflection on the unbreakable ties that bind individuals, even in the face of unspeakable tragedy. Amazing. I love this. Some might reflect, finding a strange beauty in the shared destiny, a testament to the enduring, often inexplicable nature of human connection. In the analysis of such profoundly human tragedies, particularly those ensnared in the public gaze, it becomes paramount to navigate the treacherous waters between sensationalism and genuine insight. The story of Phil and Brynn Hartman is not merely a tale of a celebrity gone too soon. It is a complex tapestry woven with threads of ambition, vulnerability, addiction, mental health struggles, and the insidious pressures inherent in the pursuit of fame. As a criminal psychology analyst and a narrative artist, my endeavor here has been to dissect the psychological landscape that contributed to this devastating end, honoring the victim's life and the tireless efforts of investigative forces, while seeking to extract educational value from the heartache. Phil Hartman was, by all accounts, a man of immense talent and quiet integrity, a true craftsman who worked diligently to achieve his dreams. His public persona, one of warmth and comedic brilliance, brought immeasurable joy to millions. Yet, beneath that surface, he harbored a deeply private nature, an emotional distance that, while perhaps a coping mechanism for the demanding world of celebrity, ultimately contributed to the growing chasm within his marriage, his attempts to protect his children, to establish boundaries for a wife struggling with profound addiction, highlight his efforts to preserve a semblance of normalcy and safety in a chaotic environment. He was a man striving for good, attempting to uphold the sanctity of his family against overwhelming odds. Brynn Hartman's journey, from a small-town girl with grand dreams to a struggling, aspiring actress battling deep insecurities and pervasive addiction, is equally, if tragically, compelling. Her relentless pursuit of stardom, her yearning for validation, and her eventual descent into substance abuse paint a picture of a soul profoundly lost and tormented. The intersection of her unfulfilled ambitions, her battle against the relentless march of time, and the insidious grip of addiction created a volatile psychological cocktail. Her actions, particularly in the fog of extreme intoxication and drug influence, appear to be a horrific manifestation of impaired judgment, rage, and profound despair, rather than a cold, calculated act of evil. To understand is not to condone, but to recognize the complex interplay of factors that can lead an individual to such a catastrophic breaking point. The legal battle surrounding Zoloft serves as a powerful reminder of the intricate relationship between pharmaceutical interventions, individual predispositions, and the potential for tragic side effects, especially when compounded by polydrug use. While a definitive causal link was not established in court, the very act of the lawsuit sparked crucial conversations about prescription drug safety and the responsibility of pharmaceutical companies. It underscores the importance of transparent communication regarding potential risks and the need for individuals to be fully informed about the substances they introduce into their bodies, particularly when combined with alcohol or illicit drugs. Ultimately, the Hartman tragedy is a stark, Humanistic lesson in the fragility of life and the immense power of inner demons. It reminds us of the critical importance of mental health awareness, the devastating consequences of untreated addiction, and the profound impact of emotional neglect within relationships. It calls for empathy for all involved, especially the innocent children left behind, who are the ultimate victims of such harrowing events. In sharing this narrative, my intention has been to honor the memory of Phil Hartman, celebrating his enduring legacy of laughter and artistic contribution, and to illuminate the complex psychological landscape that led to his untimely death. It is a story that, despite its darkness, holds profound humanistic meaning, offering cautionary tales and inspiring a deeper understanding of the forces that shape our lives. Through diligent investigation, psychological analysis, and a commitment to truth, we can strive to learn from such tragedies, raising community awareness, and, in doing so, reinforce the enduring triumph of good over evil by fostering understanding, compassion, and a renewed commitment to justice and human well-being. The laughter may have stopped, but the lessons, etched into the collective consciousness, resonate still, a somber melody played out across the silent stages of our minds.